Today we will be discussing something called ablative absolutes. Now, in English, they might not make sense because they're not an ablative because we don't have that kind of case, but I want to give you an example of what a sentence with an ablative absolute would look like in English. So I have the sentence, with the dinner having been prepared, Marcus slept well. Let's think about what is my main verb in the sentence. Well, it slept. Who did the action? Marcus. And then we have this adverb well describing how he slept. So the main idea of the sentence, the main sentence is Marcus slept well. What we are left with is this sort of participial little clause here, with the dinner having been prepared. This is what would be translated from an ablative absolute. So let's go ahead and see how they look in Latin. So let's see what the formula is for them in Latin. So in order for them to be an ablative absolute in Latin, well, let me tell you, you'll never see this coming. You're going to need a bunch of ablatives. Imagine that. In an ablative absolute, you're going to need ablatives. But you're going to have two kinds. You're going to need one ablative that is a noun and one ablative that is a participle. You will see the participle is in either the present tense or the perfect tense. So let's take a look on what they will look like. So let's use the phrase templo. We have this O over here letting us know it's in the ablative. Now, in order to translate this into English, there are several different ways you can do it. The easiest and the most common way is starting with the idea as translating with something, and then you translate your participle. So in this case, this is the temple. So with the temple, and then we translate this participle, having been built. Now this sentence this clause will stand alone on its own. So you can have a sentence with the temple having been built, Caesar rose to power, something of that idea. The idea is that this sentence will not be about the temple. It's just sort of a clause that stands on its own in front of it. So let's take a look at some more and how they will relate to other things. So right now we're going to be talking about one specific type of ablative absolute. And these specific ones are when your participle is in the past tense, like kenato and akeptis. Now, our brain wants us to think that if it happened in the past, it happened in the past. Well, you have it partly right here. So what happens in this context is if you have this past tense participle, it means that this is going to happen in the time before the main verb of the sentence, the time before. So we have, with the cookie having been eaten, Magistra cried. But when you actually take a second to look at the sentence, we know that before Magistra cried, this cookie had been eaten. And that's the idea here. So you could even translate this, instead of saying with the cookie having been eaten, you can say after the cookie had been eaten, Magistra cried. Or just giving the idea that this happened before this. And you'll even see this, even though this is in the perfect tense, you'll see it in the present tense. With this letter having been accepted, which is a perfectly fine translation if you just want to go that route, the soldier shouts. So before the soldier shouts, we know that this letter had been accepted. So although this didn't happen in the past tense, we just know that this happened in the time before the main action of the verb. So, quick review. If your participle is in the perfect tense, it means time before the main verb. Do you have enough arrows? Good. Let's learn about type 2. In this line, we see that we have an example of a present participle. And here we have my ablative absolute. Magistra cenante. We see both of these are in the ablative, and we have this participle. And we know we can translate it with something, right? So you could translate it with Magistra eating. That's fine and dandy. But it's important to note that when you have something in the present, that it is happening at the same time as your main verb. So my main verb is erant. We have the students were happy. So we know at the same time the students were happy, Magistra was eating something. So you have the choice of with Magistra eating, the students were happy. Or you could translate it as while Magistra was eating, the students were happy. Because this while gives the same idea that it was happening at the exact same time. So with the perfect, you could translate it as after. With the present, you can translate it as while. There's many different ways. Or if you just like to stick with the same category, you can just stick with the noun, then adding your participle. All right, let's see how we do.